Some horror projects fail quietly. They get canceled, shelved, forgotten. But others don't disappear because they weren't good enough. They disappear because someone decided. The world was better off not seeing them. Today's video isn't about jump scares. It's not about cheap shock. It's about abandoned horror projects, games that were erased, buried, or quietly left to rot because they crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Some of these were never officially released. Some were released in ways that were never meant to last. And some may not even be real in the way we understand reality. This video is structured like an iceberg. Each case starts on the surface, what most people know, and descends layer by layer into what made it disturbing enough to be abandoned. Nothing here is fictionalized. No stories are invented. Only real cases, real rumors, real disputes, and real unanswered questions. Let's begin at the surface. Case 1, Polybius. In the early 1980s, arcades were everywhere. They were loud, crowded, and filled with flashing lights. Teenagers lined up with pockets full of quarters, chasing high scores on machines that most parents didn't understand and didn't trust. And according to a story that has never fully gone away, somewhere in all that noise, there was a machine that shouldn't have existed. It didn't have a familiar name. It didn't belong to a known company. And after a short time, it vanished. The name people gave it was Polybius. At the surface, Polybius is often dismissed as just another video game myth, an exaggerated rumor. A creepypasta before creepypastas had a name. The story usually starts the same way. Around 1981, a few arcade cabinets allegedly appeared in Portland, Oregon. They didn't stand out at first. No recognizable branding, no flashy artwork. Just a plain cabinet with strange, abstract visuals on screen. People who claimed to play it said the gameplay was hard to describe. Not fun in the traditional sense. More like patterns, shapes, numbers, and flashes of light that felt disorienting rather than entertaining. Then came the symptoms: headaches, nausea, dizziness, insomnia, nightmares. Some players allegedly became obsessed, arguing over turns, refusing to leave the machine. Others claimed they blacked out or forgot what they'd just played. And then, according to the legend, men would arrive. Not arcade staff, not repair technicians. Unidentified men who didn't play the game or collect money. They were supposedly there to retrieve data. And after a short period of time, the machines were gone. No records, no photos, no cabinets recovered, just stories. At this level, Polybius sounds like a familiar kind of myth, a cautionary tale born out of fear of new technology, a story parents told each other when video games started replacing outdoor play. But here's where things start to get uncomfortable. When researchers tried to trace Polybius, they noticed something odd. There are no written records of the story from the early 1980s, no newspaper articles, no police reports, no arcade operator logs. The earliest known written references to Polybius don't appear until the late 1990s and early 2000s, nearly 20 years after the supposed events. Which means this wasn't a story that spread through documentation. It spread through memory. People remembered Polybius before anyone wrote it down, and memory is unreliable. Especially when you look at the era Polybius supposedly came from. In the early 1980s, arcades were intense sensory environments, high-contrast vector graphics, rapid flashing images, repetitive sound loops, players standing for hours without breaks. At the same time, society was deeply anxious. The Cold War was still active. Fear of psychological warfare was widespread. Subliminal messaging was a real public concern, debated openly on television and in newspapers. Video games were new, poorly regulated, poorly understood. People didn't know what prolonged exposure to those visuals could do. And when people experience discomfort they can't explain, they look for meaning. That's where Polybius grows. As the legend evolved, more details were added. Some said the game caused seizures. Others claimed it erased memories. Some versions suggested government experiments. Others leaned into mind control. But none of these details were consistent. Descriptions of the cabinet changed. Descriptions of the gameplay contradicted each other. Even the name Polybius appeared long after the original rumors, possibly borrowed from ancient cryptography or a Greek historian known for recording history methodically. In other words, the story wasn't stable. It mutated, and that's important, because Polybius isn't frightening due to what it supposedly did. It's frightening because it represents something else entirely. A moment where technology outpaced understanding, where fear filled the gaps left by ignorance, where stories became stronger than evidence. In later years, people tried to recreate Polybius. Fake cabinets were built. ROMs appeared online. Indie developers released tribute games claiming to be the real thing. But none of these were authentic. They were modern interpretations of a legend that never had a confirmed original, which leaves Polybius in a strange place. It might never have existed. And yet it shaped how people talk about dangerous, lost, or suppressed games to this day. Polybius didn't need to be real to leave a mark. It introduced the idea that games could be more than entertainment, that they could harm, that they could manipulate, that they could be taken away for reasons never explained. And that idea didn't disappear, because years later, something very real would be released, downloaded by millions, and then deliberately erased. And unlike Polybius, this time there would be proof. Case 2, Silent Hills, PT. By this point, it's easy to assume that abandoned horror projects are mostly rumors, stories shaped by memory, legends inflated by time. But in 2014, something happened that removed all doubt. Because this time, the horror project was real. Millions of people played it. And then it was taken away. Its name was Silent Hills, or more accurately, PT, short for Playable Teaser. When PT appeared on the PlayStation Store, it didn't look like anything special. No big marketing campaign, no clear explanation of what it was. Just a small, free download with a cryptic description. Players who launched it found themselves inside a narrow hallway of a suburban home. That was it. No weapons, no enemies, no instructions. Just a loop. You walked down the hallway, turned a corner, and returned to the same hallway again. At first, nothing seemed wrong. But then, things began to change. Lights flickered. A radio whispered fragmented news reports about domestic violence. A bathroom door creaked open. A presence was felt, not seen, but unmistakably there. And somewhere behind the player, something followed. PT didn't rely on jump scares. It relied on anticipation. The hallway became a psychological trap. Each loop slightly altered. Each detail just wrong enough to make players question their surroundings. People weren't screaming. They were leaning closer to the screen, And slowly, players realized this wasn't just a demo. It was a message. Hidden puzzles emerged, obscure, almost cruel in their design. Clues that required collective effort across forums, languages, and time zones. Radio fragments needed to be translated. Controller movements mattered. Even microphone input was rumored to play a role. Eventually, after days of global collaboration, the final secret was unlocked. The teaser ended, and the screen revealed the truth. This wasn't a standalone experiment. It was announcing Silent Hills, a new entry in the legendary horror franchise. The project was being led by Hideo Kojima, in collaboration with filmmaker Guillermo del Toro, and starring Norman Reedus. It was, without exaggeration, a dream team. The reaction was immediate. PT was hailed as one of the most effective horror experiences ever created. Not because of graphics, not because of violence, but because it understood fear. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, things changed. Behind the scenes, Kojima's relationship with Konami began to fracture. Details were never fully disclosed. Public statements were vague. Rumors filled the silence. And in 2015, the announcement came. Silent Hills was canceled. The project was dead. But cancellation wasn't the end of the story, because Konami didn't just cancel Silent Hills. They erased PT. The teaser was removed from the PlayStation Store entirely. No official archive, no re-release, no explanation beyond a brief statement. If you hadn't downloaded it already, you never could. And even worse, consoles that had PT installed couldn't re-download it if deleted. It was gone. Players who still had it installed suddenly owned something rare. A piece of digital media that could not be legally reacquired. PlayStation 4 consoles with PT installed began selling for inflated prices. Thousands of dollars, not for the hardware, but for what was trapped inside it. Attempts to preserve the game were blocked. Ports were shut down. Fan recreations were taken down or restricted. Unlike Polybius, this wasn't memory distorting reality. This was reality being deliberately restricted. And the most unsettling part? Konami never gave a full reason. No detailed explanation. No post-mortem. No acknowledgement of what PT represented to players. It was simply removed. PT demonstrated something terrifying in its own way. That a piece of art could exist, be experienced by millions, and then be selectively erased. Not lost by time, not corrupted by memory, but actively withheld. And if something as influential as PT could vanish almost overnight, it raised an uncomfortable question. How many other horror projects disappeared without anyone noticing? And what happens when something vanishes not because it was unfinished, but because it worked too well? Case 3, Sad Satan. If Polybius was a rumor and Silent Hills was erased, then Sad Satan is something far worse, because no one can agree on what it truly was. Sad Satan first surfaced in 2015 through a small YouTube channel called Obscure Horror Corner. The creator claimed they had discovered the game on the deep web, hidden behind Tor links, buried among forums and directories that weren't indexed by normal search engines. The video showed a first-person experience. No menus, no instructions, no context. Just endless, narrow concrete corridors. The environment was almost offensively minimal. Gray walls, low lighting, a constant sense of confinement. As the player walked forward, distorted audio played in loops, reverse nursery rhymes, static, fragments of speeches, numbers whispered out of order. At random intervals, the screen would flash images. Some were historical mugshots. Some were political figures. Some were crime scene photos. The footage was low quality, intentionally degraded, making it difficult to tell what was real and what was manipulated. But that uncertainty was exactly what unsettled people, because some images looked too real. Viewers began pausing frames, comparing screenshots, cross-referencing faces, and that's when things escalated. People claimed the game contained real photographs of deceased children. Others said some images were tied to unsolved crimes. Some alleged that certain versions of the game included illegal material. At this point, Sad Satan stopped being a horror curiosity. It became a warning. Multiple versions of the game began circulating. Some were labeled safe. Others were explicitly described as uncensored. And here's where the story fractures. No two downloads were the same. Some players reported only abstract imagery and disturbing audio. Others claimed their version showed far worse, content that crossed from horror into criminality. Soon, cybersecurity experts began analyzing the files. They found malware embedded in certain versions, keyloggers, backdoors, programs designed not to scare, but to compromise systems. Then came the rumors about the creator. The name ZK began circulating. Some claimed it was an alias. Others said the individual behind Sad Satan was later arrested for unrelated charges involving exploitation. Nothing was conclusively proven, but no official denial ever came either. The original video was eventually taken down. Re-uploads were demonetized or removed. Links to the game vanished. And unlike Silent Hills, there was no corporation to issue a statement. No archive, no explanation, just fragments. Today, Sad Satan exists in a strange state. Not fully lost, not fully accessible. You can find discussions, screenshots, secondhand accounts, but no definitive, verified version of the game is considered safe to download. And that ambiguity is what makes it uniquely disturbing. Because Sad Satan isn't just an abandoned horror project. It's a case where the act of preservation itself became dangerous. Most abandoned projects disappear because they fail. Some are canceled due to budget. Others due to creative differences. Sad Satan disappeared because people were afraid of what preserving it might mean. Afraid of what it could expose. Afraid of what it might contain. Afraid of becoming part of the story. And that's where this iceberg truly ends. Not with a clear answer, not with closure, but with something that exists on the edge of the internet. Part legend, part evidence, and part warning. Because sometimes horror projects aren't abandoned because they weren't finished. They're abandoned because finishing them would mean letting something out that was never meant to be found. Polybius was never proven. It lived in memory, distorted, unreliable, fading. PT was real. Millions of people played it. And then it was deliberately erased. Sad Satan went further. It wasn't just abandoned. It became unsafe to preserve. 3 cases. 3 disappearances, each removed in a different way. Forgotten, deleted, avoided, and yet they all share the same pattern. None of them vanished because they failed. They vanished because they crossed a line that wasn't technical, a line that wasn't creative, a line that wasn't meant to be crossed at all, which raises one final question. What happens when something doesn't disappear because it was forgotten, or erased, or feared, but because it was never supposed to be seen in the first place? Because there is something, not a rumor, not a cancellation, not a dangerous download, something that was never released, never announced, never archived, something internal, incomplete, visible only for a moment. And once people realized it existed, it wasn't denied. It wasn't explained. It wasn't even acknowledged. It was simply sealed. It isn't something that vanished. It's something that was briefly visible and then locked away. And if these are the projects we know about, the most disturbing ones are the ones we were never allowed to see. Well, we'll see them in another video.